opportunity to do that. But I found that incorporating the free hugs into my megaphoning was definitely a good decision, because it just raises my positive feedback up exponentially. You know?
That's really good, yeah, and I do appreciate the free hugs thing. I wonder if you can get into festivals, because that would always be a good one. Festivals, I found, are extremely receptive to our ideas. I went to Leeds Festival with Jim Phillips about 2 years ago.
Oh yeah. I never heard how that went. How did that go?
It was wonderful. I mean, Jim is a tornado basically. Anyway, and I mean, we took in 200 DVDs, and we were stopped at the gates by the people who were checking every bag, and they opened this up. And go, what are all these DVDs? And we said, it's copies of Zeitgeist Addendum, and do you want one? He goes, oh, I've seen this. Makes so much sense. So I'm really pleased I stopped you now. And listen, that I have experienced more than once with this. A couple of years ago, you might remember that an activist called William Dixon he stood up on the plinth in Trafalgar Square with a giant earth that he blew up and put together. And unfortunately, it burst, but he had a very good alternate plan, knowing that could be the case. And we were allowed much closer than normal by the guard there, the guard who normally keeps people very far away. And she said, no, you guys can stand wherever you want because I agree with what you're doing. And I don't think it's an accidental thing that we've seen that a couple of times. I think the people who wield power, at least on the street, in terms of police or security services, actually are very, 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 very tuned in to what they're doing. And it's only the violent arseholes that, by the way, exist everywhere, that we hear about, the policemen who beat up and kill people at the WTO arguments, it was the G8 summit, wasn't it? Those are unfortunately not just bad apples, but of course encouraged by their power wielding and all the rest of the fact they're given weapons and the monopoly of violence over the population. But actually, there are within their ranks there are very otherwise peaceful and empathic people who just are wishing for an end to the need for their job, and I've met them, and I know some of them very well. So it's always interesting to see that because it gives me hope. But yeah, Leeds Festival. So we got in, having given one of the DVDs to the man checking our bags, and then of course because Enter Shikari were playing, we found that when they went on stage, we just got rid of all of our DVDs immediately because everyone was walking past going, yeah, I know you guys from them. I found it out through those guys, Yeah. And then we saw Henry. I forgot his name. I'm very bad on names today, I find. Henry Rollins.
Yeah.
We went and saw Henry Rollins doing stand-up, and he was saying all the same stuff that we were. Of course they are. You'll find, actually, if you listen to most activism, they're all saying exactly the same thing with various inflections and various focuses. And we found it all very, very interesting. And then there was the premiere of the greatest movie ever sold, which is the Morgan Spurlock documentary on funding advertising. Using advertising to fund movies by funding the movie via advertising. So it's actually called Pom Wonderful Presents the Greatest Show on Earth because he actually sold the title to Pom Wonderful, who make pomegranate juice.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and it features 3 different ad spots during the film, and they are the funniest ad spots ever. And they were really sold to, they really were adverts for, I think, Holiday Inn, some kind of weird shampoo and something else. They really were paid for by those guys, and he got to do what he wanted to with them. So very, very fun. Yeah, so it was really good. And I mean, as anybody who's been to a festival will know, they generally do feature people who are socially minded, who aren't going to be vicious all-out capitalists, or particularly unempathic. I mean, it does vary, I suppose, but I've found the few that I've been to, the overwhelming majority of people are the kind of people that you hope to meet every day, and you wonder where they are all year until you meet them. Yeah, so it was really good, and we should do it again. I've been meaning to do it again. It's just that it costs so damn much to get in. I mean, I think that one cost me 400 quid for me and
wow.
Yeah, so and. It's a lot. I mean, it's 200 quid each for all 3 days. And I live within driving distance of it, so we didn't even stay there. It was good. It was good. Festival.
Yeah, I mean, mean, because I've leafleted a festival before. It's the I think it's called the Over the Moon Festival now. But because it changed its name like the next year after I went there. But when I went there, it was called the Out of the Ordinary Festival. It's basically like a hippie festival in Hailsham, and I was basically asked there because a friend of mine who, he's gone off the radar lately, but I think he's still an activist, but he has gone off the radar. But he basically knew one of the organisers, and he was able to get a free pitch. And he asked me, "Do you want to come along as well?" And I'm like, "Let me get this straight. I get to hang around in the sun at a festival, talking to people about a resource-based economy for 3 days." Hell yeah. and that's because we were able to get in, for free, because he knew the organisers. So maybe one of the things that could be instrumental in us, leafleting festivals is if anyone listening, if you're clued into this train of thought, if you want to help spread this, and if you know anyone who could get us in for free in any festivals, get in touch with us. Because I think that would be brilliant. That really would be brilliant if we could get our foot in the door for most festivals, and it would just be mind blowing.
There's got to be a way of doing it, hasn't there? And I think that chance does exist. And I mean, we know now, thanks to people like Russell Brand and Enter Shikari, and I can name a few others actually. Woody Harrelson's one of my favourites. We have friends in high places. We have people who advocate what we talk about. So one day that will translate, I think, into a not quite a back door, but an assisted push into fora that are otherwise quite tricky to get into. And if it's not us, then it'll be them. It's the most important thing is the message. And I think it's on the way. The signs are good. I think people get very frustrated. If you're listening to this and you find that our pace is glacial, let me remind you that you're up against trillions of dollars of interest.
Yeah.
And I say interest in the sense of vested interest rather than the mechanism of the ammunition for the great capitalist engine. And that is not to be underestimated. The Occupy people found this out the hard way, and I think they sort of anticipated it anyway. Even with a worldwide 2,500 encampment protest that was very well organized, that had the backing of Anonymous, you can do all kinds of crazy stuff, that occupied actual buildings under squatters' rights. In other words, it was illegal to remove these people. Even then, after a while, when they started asking for the things that they really wanted, things like an end to the Delaware incorporation ability in America, where you can basically dodge all tax as a corporation by being incorporated in Delaware, which is why every company in America, if you read their contracts, are headquartered in Delaware. They asked for the end of that. They asked for, I think it was full reserve banking, which is something that John McMurtry demands in the counter stage of capitalism as well. And actually, a point on that in a moment that I should have filled the airwaves with just now when we were both stuck. Even with all of that, and with all of, let me remind you also, mainstream coverage on every channel, all the time. It was there all the time. It took a while. It took a couple of weeks before Fox and Glenn Beck and all the other idiots had to admit that something was going on. These people were covered extremely well. That would cost millions of dollars of PR placement if you were to buy that. Even with all of that, and with all of that, it lasted almost a year, they did not succeed in what they really wanted, which was, of course, to have the groundswell turn into a decent revolution that would address these problems now. It faded. Now, I maintain they actually succeeded on a couple of levels. They succeeded by showing that when you organize and protest long enough, the state's ultimate and only weapon against you is violence. All right? Yeah. They get out the fucking truncheons and beat you. And that, I think, is actually a success, because that needs to be proven to a generation that has not gone through war. We have not gone through war. You and I lived during what is known as the Great Peace. It's an unprecedented area of history where we have not been under physical direct attack by another nation state in 65, 70 years now, which is, we used to start a war every 2 years. up until the 1940s. It was a new war every couple of years, including a bunch of wars we've never even heard of, which then also reminds you that history is very fickle and will probably not remember you or me. And you were saying before that you feel you're now at a position where you're on the sort of a higher level of the thinking of this. I catch myself thinking that sometimes too, but let me put it another way for you. It's almost like a thought experiment. If and when, and I maintain when, the real train of thought of a resource-based economy turns into a reality and we start living as every other thing on the planet does, within the bounds of our ecology, but by using technology to harness and build on that and maximize ourselves without detriment to that ecology or ourselves. If that takes hold, the educational levels will rise for everybody in the world. We will become extremely clever, and there'll be various ways of doing this. Some of it will be the singularity transhumanist ideas of body modification, all that. Some of it's going to just be down to nutrition. Kids have to drink water in order to concentrate. You drink juice, you have a sugar crash. All this stuff is related. In that world, you and I will be considered absolute fools. They will look back on the videos and think it's hilarious that we once tried to describe what they understand on a level that is ridiculously superior to our own. They're going to look back and not see us at all as prophets. They're going to see us as very, very lame, very late to the table, and very patchy advocates for something that is now to them utterly self-evident and hilarious that was never not believed. So bear that in mind sometimes. I always do that when I correct myself. When people write to me and go, oh my God, you're amazing, which happens with Blue Moon anyway, I always remind myself that that's not true at all, and that they think that because they're ill-educated and so am I. So anyway, that sounds rather aggressive. I don't mean it to be. But yeah, so I mean, Occupy succeeded on that level, and it also succeeded because it turned into a more general ideology. You know, it turned into a general push, and it made even one advisor in the Bank of England say on the record with their own name that Occupy was right and that the reforms to the banking system are needed. Now, you and I will balk at that word reform immediately because by reform we have come to understand the system adapting to the way that we think and making itself more strong. Nevertheless, I think it's a very, very big thing and a very difficult thing probably politically to have said in the Bank of England is to say, you know what, yeah, we're not right. Like, we need to fix stuff because the side effects have to be acknowledged and they are not good. And they must be sorted out. So, you know, it's very tough. So any movement members who feel that we're not doing enough, it's not happening fast enough, have to bear all of that in mind and just settle in, man, because it's going to be a long, difficult, insulting, hard, tedious, at times self-destructive, you know, you will be considered a kook and a crazy and a bizarre man. And, you know, why don't you just watch Dancing with the Stars? Why do you have to talk about this all the time? You know, you'll get that all the time. You get that all the time because people really find it very difficult and find it too much work. You know, God, sometimes I find it too much work, and I spend weeks not thinking about it at all and doing something very different. When I'm not also earning my keep in my job, which of course we all have as well. So take heart, fellow listeners. It is tough. It is difficult. It'll be fraught with failure before it's fraught with success.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most pivotal understandings that we do need to come to, because one of the reasons why I did my December podcast is to try and, you know, provide that avenue for the people who were saying that, you know, TZM isn't doing enough, or, you know, because I actually presented the question to people, do you think TZM has been effective? If not, why? And if so, why? And try and put all these things. But I mean, you are right that Occupy. I too believe that Occupy was very successful in the fact that that, you know, their expectations of revolution were wholly misguided, because, you know, as you explained, you know, the kind of change that is necessary would be completely unrealistic and impossible even in the current paradigm that we live in, even the kind of brains that we have, that kind of rapid change, it would be completely devastating to our frames of mind, and it would not result in the kind of world that we would want. Instead, I think Occupy was successful in planting those seeds. Because, I mean, Russell Brand said this correctly in his in that groundbreaking interview that everyone suddenly started paying attention to him for, the interview with Jeremy Paxman. Russell said correctly that it hasn't been until now that it's entered the public lexicon of the idea of the 99% versus the 1%. That kind of idea hadn't really been in public consciousness until Occupy.
Yeah, I do agree. It's also, by the way, I can't believe I've not talked about it on the global show yet, and I will do. That moment is something I've been waiting for years, that Russell Brand interview. I mean, he didn't do it completely correctly. There's actually a very, very decent article on Media Lens that points out the failings of that interview. But look, no one's perfect, although you can give the old college try. And I think he did rather well, given the fact that he is obviously coming as a performer and a celebrity. He is limited to a certain lexicon to carry on his reputation, which of course is important because otherwise people will stop listening to you. But, I mean, yeah, for years I'd watched Newsnight and I couldn't watch it anymore because I just kept screaming at the host.
Yeah.
Palm moment, sponsored by RB Facepalm. So, it really was. I was like, my God, why don't they talk about the actual problems instead of all this stupid shit about voting for different people? Stop it. Stop it! Of course, and then I realized the TV couldn't hear me, and so I just stopped watching it. But that interview, thank God it came along when YouTube existed, because what if that had gone out in the 90s? It could have done. This stuff could have maybe reached public consciousness through a different medium in the 90s, when we didn't have a permanent video repository, and most people would have missed it. Now it's archived, bitches, and you have to watch it. And it was the one time where I ended up agreeing more with the actual guest than with the host. In fact, I disagree with the host very vehemently, and I don't know if you know this, you probably do. Jeremy Paxman says that, so you can't be asked to vote? What you can't be asked to vote. And it's like, oh, come on, Jeremy. Then what happens? He admits that in the last election he didn't vote, which tells us something very important about Jeremy Paxman, and indeed about journalists in general. They will argue the other side. End of. They won't agree. They won't say, yes, this is a good idea. People should look into this. They will say, why should we listen to you? In other words, we live not in a true discursive society. We live in a society of forced debate, of oppositional behaviors. And that is extremely detrimental because it means who are you going to side with? If you're watching as an upper middle class chap, are you going to be listening to the comedic dude who has sex with all the women in the world? Or are you going to be listening to the man who studied English literature and politics? I think he did PPE at Oxford, who could talk endlessly on multiple subjects. Very, very clever man. You're going to listen to that guy, aren't you? And oh, look, he's against what Russell Brand is saying. So I'm hoping that actually was a lesson in action of how our media works. And
I think one of the things that enraged me most about what Jeremy Paxman said in that interview is when he asked Russell Brand a question. Now, the question itself, if you just look at the wording, it's perfectly fine, perfectly innocent. It's just the way he asked it. When he said, "You want a revolution, don't you?" Now that sort of automatically paints the idea of revolution. It automatically paints it in a very general term, in a very general sort of implication. But also it infers that revolution is something bad, and that, oh yes, Russell, I've just called you out for the fact that you're such a bad man that you want revolution. How dare you? And I'm calling you out, and I'm making you admit on public television that you want something that is so bad, and that just really infuriated me.
I know exactly what you mean, because the way he affected that makes it sound extreme, and the word extreme is so close to extremist that we can shut our minds off and not think about it so much. So I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, and you have to very, very carefully watch how people phrase their questions. Yeah, because they say more than the words. And it's very important stuff. By the way, we're as an activist group, and I don't mean us personally, I mean every single activist out there, we're guilty of very similar things. When Edward Snowden came out with the NSA files, which are still coming out every single day, and which, have largely been slipped to the back pages, the first thing that happened was a lot of other generally activists or people who have been critiquing government for years come out and say, oh, well, this is nothing new. Now, that's extremely dangerous to do that. Because when you do that, people, again, just shut off and don't think about what's actually being leaked. They just go, oh, it's a pattern, is there? Oh, good. That means he's finished saying that and I can go and look at something else now. And it seems to be the very people who should be lauding him and saying, my God, now we actually have the hard physical evidence of something that we did know about maybe before. It has, if you read Cypherpunks by Julian Assange and 2 or 3 other hackers, it came out in 2012. They talk about NSA directly. They talk about exactly what it is that Snowden ended up revealing 6 months later. So yes, it was known before. That's fine. But they should surely be pleased about it. Instead, they don't like the fact the limelight has been stolen from them, and they're paying public in some cases, the people who buy their books. And so they have to down it by one-upping him and saying, oh, well, I talked about this before, of course. And I think that's actually extremely dangerous. I think it's extremely egotistically minded, and I think it's destructive to any sort of discourse whatsoever. And so Paxman, and indeed some of the people who inhabit our corner of the anti-statist, pro all of humanity model, actually end up doing sometimes ourselves, because we end up, just like everybody else, vested in a system where we have to carve out a niche in order to feed our children. And, that's, in fact, actually is the reason why I haven't as yet produced anything that could be called for sale, or taken any money ever, for what I do, because I would hate for that to even become a possibility in my own rhetoric. Of course, there is still the emotional side, but at least it wouldn't be a financially controlled one. And I have to keep reinforcing that and keep doing that. Or do what Bakari Pace and what Federico Pistono is doing, and if I did sell something, I'd also give it away for free. It's also what Peter does, and it's what a lot of people do. What is it? Lawrence Lessig did it with Free Culture. It was, I think, as far as I know, at least the earliest book that did that in 2004. Cory Doctorow, who runs boingboing.net, also does this with all of his books, gives them away for free as well as sell them. I think it's the great model because it provides that open access for information that then also can be used to bolster their financial stability. I think that's a decent thing. So yeah.
Yeah, because going back to the NSA revelations thing, you are right in saying that it's an egotistical thing, because it's the childish "I told you so" mentality. People and it goes back to one of the things that Jen Wilding revealed in her one of her presentations, that I think it's one of the strongest human addictions, I think she says, or one of the strongest human compulsions is being right. And when this whole thing came out, I saw a lot of people on my news feed saying things like, I've been telling people this sort of stuff for years, and I'm guilty of that sort of thing myself, because there seems to be this compulsion that if you've been saying something for a certain amount of time, and then when it comes out into public knowledge, that somehow means that you have this status or something because you came to that realization sooner. And it kind of also links into the kind of negative feelings I would feel sometimes about my own awareness, where I think back to when I was in school, and I think back to some of the things I was taught in school, and I actually feel quite bummed out that I wasn't at this level of awareness back then, because if I was, then I wouldn't have bought that bullshit, and I would, and I keep thinking, what level of awareness would I be at today if I knew what I know now back then?
There is actually a really good book called If I'd Known Now, and If I'd Known Back Then What I Know Now. And in fact, Jacques Fresco is one of the authors. It's a collection of many, many different authors. Fresco is quoted in it here. It's absolutely true. Of course, this is, of course, why the evolution of education even works at all, is because we can build on prior knowledge, and we know that takes time. As yet, we still have to learn things in a linear way. That's why learning a new language takes so long, or it can take shorter amount of time, but we think in linear ways. There's no way of uploading data to our minds yet. Once there is, by the way.
Yet.
Yeah, they claim to have done machine matrix-style learning which is when I'm referencing the film there where they get plugged in and I know Kung Fu.
Show me.
Yeah, once we have that, that's going to be a major problem for any sort of power structure, because then we can update ourselves incredibly quickly. They could have been able to do it with monkeys, but I think it's probably miles and miles and miles away from human use yet, of course.
Yeah.
But it's on the way. It's on the way. If I had to make a prediction, I would say that one day it'll be definitely possible, and it'll be wirelessly possible. It'll be possible in a way that doesn't become an intrusion, a physical intrusion into our brains. But listen, I have something to run by you, and yes. I'd like feedback on this, because I'm thinking of doing a study on this, like a proper study, in order to get into the academic world. I'm still unsure about this, but I was recently listening to one of my favorite authors, whom I haven't read any of for a long time because I've been so consumed by all the stuff that we have to read for Zeitgeist. Chuck Palahniuk, who wrote Fight Club.
Right, yeah.
Lullaby and Diary and all those wonderful books. I mean, every single one is fascinating. He was interviewed recently about Do Writers Tell the Truth? Something like that. He was at the library in Baltimore, the Pratt, the Enoch Pratt Free Library. Enoch Pratt was an industrialist who lived in Baltimore, and I was in Baltimore last year, and I wanted to go to the library, but I didn't quite have time. At the Pratt Library, somebody asks Palahniuk that question. They say, is it the job of the writer to tell truth? Something like that. People can look this up for themselves. It's a very new interview from, I think, November of last year, of 2013. And he answers in a very roundabout way, and it suddenly got me thinking. He says, well, I was talking to Max Brooks. Max Brooks has become a household name because he wrote World War Z, which was eventually turned into a film that utterly fails to convey anything about the book. And, of course, if you know anything about Max Brooks' history, which I did not at the time, Max Brooks' two parents are Mel Brooks and the lovely, but yet deceased, Anne Bancroft, who is, of course, Mrs. Robinson from The Graduate, the wonderful, radiant lady that she is. She died by a very vicious cancer. And Max Brooks' book is about zombies taking over the social body and spreading and sub-optimizing and controlling the bodies and repurposing them for the spread of the zombie infection. By now, you must be picking up what the undercurrent of Palahniuk's point is. He said to Max Brooks, is this book about your mother? And Max Brooks said, yes, it is. And Palahniuk said, well, why are you writing it for 13-year-old people who love zombie stories? And he said, well, no one wants to read a book about an old lady dying of cancer, but they do want to read a book about zombies.
Yeah.
That made me think. It made me remember John McMurtry. And it made me suddenly think, is it possible that something has happened to our understanding of the cancerous impulse, the mechanism by which life function is mimicked and yet subverted at the cost of the body, whether it be social or your physical body, so that we might now be able to use the understanding of how cancer works and what the effects of cancer are, in other words, non-detection and ultimate destruction of the body due to continual non-detection. Could it be that has become a mechanism of thought that allows, in literature, stories to be told that could not have otherwise been told? No one wants to read a story about an old lady dying of cancer. And that is gradually been applied elsewhere. So John McMurtry has done the very, very good job of using this as not as a metaphor, but as he calls it in the second edition, an explanatory model. In other words, it's not that it's like something, it's that it is it. It's beyond the metaphor of it is it. It's the model by which it's working. So that we can now uncover a new type of discourse where, by borrowing almost metaphorically as an explanatory model the construction of and the behavior of cancer, so that we can now talk about things the way we've never talked about them before, and recognize the social intrusion of cancerous economic systems, or be able to stomach a reading of a book that should actually still convey to you the horrific intrusion and ultimate destruction of a society which is playing the part of Anne Bancroft, but through many, many people. And you can extend this even further. You can extend it actually to the treatment of cancer itself, where